It's a phrase surely known to billions. No two words better symbolize the industry, the hobby, the art form of the video game. But the origins of this expression go back further than you might think. So what was the first game over? People have referred to games as over, synonymous with finished, for a long time.
However, there would be no harm, she thought, in asking if the game was over.
According to the OED, that usage goes back 2.5 centuries. But we're interested in the exact phrase, in its modern sense, a means of indicating to players that they're done. What was the first use of the words game over, and when? Time for some detective work. Let's begin in 1986 with perhaps the most famous example.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
This line was not in James Cameron's script. Whenever you hear the phrase game over used to mean the situation is hopeless, that's all thanks to an ad-lib by the late Bill Paxton. Of course, the expression was already well known after the video game boom of the late 70s and early 80s. The majority of arcade hits had a game over, like Space Invaders in 1978, pushing the words into the public mind and popular culture. But we can go back further than that. We see a game over in Atari's Night Driver in 1976, and Taito's Gunfight the year before. This was the first arcade video game to use a microprocessor to run a stored program. Earlier machines were made up of transistors and other components hardwired on a board in a specific configuration. The rudimentary capabilities of these machines didn't usually extend to displaying text on the screen. So you might think that's the end of the line. Indeed, some people claim that Gunfight had the first game over. But historian Ethan Johnson recently found an earlier example, an obscure Pong clone from a little-known and short-lived American company called 4Play Manufacturing. Sports Center was one of those transistor-based machines, but the cabinet included an LED labelled Game Over When Lit. It was released in November 1973, 2 years earlier than Gunfight. Perhaps this is the first video game to use the expression, though it's possible that earlier examples are waiting to be found. But we're still a long way from the first game over. To find that, we need to look at games that weren't played on a screen, at the era when amusement arcades were filled with a wondrous array of electromechanical contraptions. For example, this machine by Sega, also called Gunfight, has game over signs that light up when one player wins. But that's a late example, 1970. We can find plenty in the 1950s. Super Jumbo, Golden Nugget, Twin Hockey, this 1950 patent for a miniature bowling alley. Even this early, there's evidence that the phrase had crossed over into the culture. In 1955, according to a newspaper from Rochester, New York, high school girls had adopted it into their schoolyard slang.
Game over when your boyfriend stops calling.
It's not hard to guess where teens liked to hang out in 1950s Rochester. So can we beat the 1950s for the earliest game over? Well, yes we can.
Make an operator's piece out of any shuffleboard. Chicago Coins Shuffle King scoreboard fits the center of any and all shuffleboards. Game over prominently visible. See your distributor today. Chicago Coin Machine Company, 1725 Diversey Boulevard, Chicago 14, Illinois.
Table shuffleboard, where players slid pucks down a waxed 22-foot table, surged in popularity after the Second World War. Chicago Coins Shuffle King went on sale in October or November of 1948, available either as a scoreboard to be attached to a regulation shuffleboard or as an all-in-one unit. With this apparatus, the score could be kept by players pushing buttons. The first of 15 won, illuminating the sign at the bottom. It's in this scoring device that we find our earliest candidate for the first game over. Not the first in function, the words game complete served the same purpose on this Bally pinball machine from 1936, but it is the earliest use we've found of the iconic expression. But there may be earlier examples. Many of these vintage machines aren't well preserved or documented. Pictures are sparse, and surviving examples even sparser. It may be impossible to pin down the first game over with absolute certainty. History is just that way sometimes. The games we play have changed, and we don't see game over screens as much as we used to. Today, fail states are usually softer, immediate respawn, or at least unlimited continues. Why would you need a game over message if the game never ends? but though it may be on the wane, it can still be seen, and I think that'll continue for a long time to come. Over 70 years after it was coined, there's still life in the old expression. The game's not over yet. Hi, Chris here, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you might be interested in another one that I made about the first controversial violent video game Death Race. The link's on the end card or down in the thing. Thanks to everyone who gave me a hand with the research for this episode and to all of my supporters on Patreon. If you're curious about how you can help me make more videos like this and get a little extra stuff for your trouble, the link's down in the thingy and all the details are there. Thanks, I'll see you again in the past.